Hello and welcome back. Today we will be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series with our first tutorial of patch 1.7, which is going to be a metagame update for patch 1.7. The goal here is to be timely rather than timeless. We're releasing this the day after the release of the patch, and we're going to be trying to talk about a lot of the new mechanics, a lot of the changes, a lot of the balance stuff, to give you more of a, or less of a rough idea, rather than deep diving any one individual thing. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of things. Now, I might get a lot of stuff wrong. I'm going to try and avoid to heavily qualify every statement I make, because I'm not super confident in a lot of things necessarily now, but we will be talking about the new mechanics. Namely, we will be talking about the pillars first, and then we will also be talking about the new ownership law and how all the economic system has changed. These are the two really big changes, but then we'll be going into kind of a smaller detail about a bunch of different things that I think will dramatically change the way you play, and we're still discovering stuff, so if you think that there's anything I missed that's important, feel free to put it in the comments, but other than that, we're going to get into it. Alright, so first up, we are going to have power blocks. Now, I just wanted to note that the devs are aware of this. Their fix will be coming in. A fix is actually live on the Discord, but the way cohesion is calculated is currently bugged because of a misplaced bracket in the code, and so you might have some problems. Specifically, if you're doing an ideological union, they tend to be a little bit more acute. Now, if we leave this power block, we're going to see that when we form a power block, we can choose between 5 central pillars if you have the DLC, or just a trade league if you do not. The trade league seems to be either one of the better or the second best ones, where it is giving you a free customs union, but it is importantly, and this is going to be a consideration for all the power blocks, giving you access to 2 relatively good primary principle groups. You have to have one of them slotted in. I think this is one of the important ways of evaluating this. I think external trade is pretty good. It gives you an influential trade center is the main thing, giving you 25% migration interaction, as well as 2 influence, which allows you to wheel and deal while maintaining low infamy a lot better, maintain high relations, and so this is useful because the AI is also a lot more aggressive. Internal trade, it seems decent as well, not terrible, not super good. Again, not super confident on the evaluations on these principal groups though. Ideological union is interesting. It allows you to force regime change on subjects. It is basically impossible to, or it is very difficult to develop cohesion as a result of the bug with an ideological union, which means it's hard to get mandate progress, so it's hard to fill out your principal slots. So would not recommend doing that if you are playing within the first week. In particular, creative legislature and ideological truth do not look too good. I think ideological truth is a little bit better. Creative legislature is maybe, creative legislature maybe lets you kind of get away with some more stuff, which is maybe important because of increased radicalism overall in the patch, but I think that you can change the laws of your subjects well enough that this forced regime change is maybe not essential, but the forced regime change will allow you to much more easily pass open borders, which I think is the key thing, where if you can get people in a power block, you open the borders and you siphon off pops from them. Maybe this is something that is going to be worth doing, but other than that, I think ideological union's kind of medium. I think military treaty is pretty bad, mainly because I think the 2 primary principal groups are bad, with the exception of going for some sort of high infamy world conquest, in which case it kind of makes some sense. This one doesn't seem that good. Could call power block members in defensive packs, could call all. This actually seems like a little bit annoying. And offensive coordination gives you extra infamy, but allows you to declare more war goal maneuvers, or gives you more maneuvers for war goals, effectively speaking, and less block cohesion. This doesn't seem that good unless you're going for some sort of high infamy thing, although getting a free war goal when joining on the side of someone who is being attacked is maybe there's some strategy where you try and pull Mexico into your block and you just get free war goals on the USA, but this seems like kind of outside the scope of things, so I don't think that they're very good. Next up is Sovereign Empire, which is not fully revealed to us because we don't have monarchy. You need to have it in. Vassalization is one of the better principles, so having it as your primary principal group is kind of nice. 25 authority per subject. You can lean into this. You can end up having 20 subjects. This will be good. I believe you gain cohesion and mandate progress based on how loyal your vassals are, or this is going to be important for the calculation. Exploitation of members doesn't seem that good, but it could be missing something. There could be something more to it, but it in particular gives you an interaction where if you can pull someone into your block, you can subjugate them using your power for Sovereign Empire for 0 infamy. Now, this seems pretty strong, but it also seems like it's almost easier to get someone as a subject than it is to pull them into your block. Really have to play more with this. This one is kind of tied bad, or it's either better than the Trade League or worse than the Trade League, but these are kind of the two big ones that I think are going to be worth playing. And then there's Religious Convocation, mainly seems to be more of an RP thing. The principles do not seem very strong. Trade route competitiveness just with a given religion seems worse than the trade principles. The extra income transfer from heathen subjects, if you have heathen subjects, is going to hurt your ability to be cohesive. Plus minus radicals, I mean, that doesn't seem like it's worth it relative to what you can get out of other principles. For sacred civics, it allows you to give higher acceptance for diplomatic proposals for countries with the same religion, but this doesn't seem that strong because there are other ways you can kind of wheel and deal, and I think if you're proactive, getting something like the trade leagues, external trade is probably going to be better because it's going to give you a lot more diplo, and then you can impose the same church and state law on bloc members, okay, but you could also just get them to pass the laws, especially if you are ideological, you could do that type of thing. Anyways, this also allows you to force religion on people, so I really think it's an RP thing, but if you wanted to do a religious RP, this is there for that, so that seems good. We're going to go very quickly over the principles that I think stand out that are not part of the primary ones, because we went over all the primary ones. Construction, I think that this one's really strong, especially for just 1 point. 10% state construction efficiency is really strong modifier. On the third level, you get the United Construction Conglomerate, which is better than the basic tooling company, and is probably better than any tooling company except for the one that is in Belgium, the one that's in Greece, and the one that's in Poland. And so for a lot, this will be pretty good. But I think that is probably worth maybe slotting in construction pretty early on, no matter what you're doing, and then swapping it out later, because construction 10% is really good. And then you can evaluate principles in a weird way, because you could view some as being good in different phases of the game. And so it's not necessarily the case that you want to be like, oh, these are the 4 best principles, so I'm going to slot them in. Market unification does give you a customs union if you are not a trade league. If you're a trade league, you get one anyways. That seems to be the primary power. I think that I think if you want to use market unification, you should probably go trade league. But if you're looking for a specific strategy, like maybe you go ideological union so that you can change people to open borders, and then you need a market so you can siphon off their pops because you changed their borders, but they're somehow not your subject, this sort of thing, maybe this plays. Advanced research, tried it out. This actually feels pretty weak. Maybe I'm missing something. I'm super not confident in this, but it basically just gives you more research. We have food standardization, pretty interesting, gives you decreased mortality, increased agricultural throughput, standard living, and this one's a little bit hard to see sometimes, efficient canning processes, which increases the net output of the groceries by about 10%, and is increasing it by increasing the groceries output from 60 to 70 without increasing any of the inputs here. Police coordination just seems kind of bad. I think that the big thing is that it's giving you extra authority. I mean, it's also minus movement radicalism is not a non-factor. There's a lot more radicalism in this patch overall, but I think that it's just, if you want authority, I think you go with vassalization, and so opportunity cost of using a slot on police coordination just seems super not worth it. Transportation infrastructure, really an interesting one. Was trying to evaluate it. I don't think it's very good, but I also super not confident in my evaluation. They have steam trains, which are or special train PMs, which are a little bit better. I think they overall kind of increase the inputs by 20% and the outputs by 20%, which is going to increase the net by 20%. But beyond that, it's I don't know how to evaluate how good these are. I think that they're pretty good, but this is one we almost ended up using in one of our runs, but I think that it's overall just not there. Militarized industry, an interesting one. The main thing to write home about is the minus military goods cost. I think that you use this on Qing, and I think you probably don't use it for anyone else, but it also gives you balloon reconnaissance, so there's that. It costs fabric and oil. I don't know how to evaluate balloon reconnaissance, to be honest. It gives you more occupation. Maybe that occupation's good enough. I think that is better to just have a bigger eco, and then I don't, it's difficult. Freedom of movement. This one seems to be super OP. As of right now, it is bugged. The increased exchange should be applying locally. This is going to give migration attraction on arts academy and universities, but instead it applies globally. So if you have 50 different level 1 arts academies in 50 different states, you will instead get 1,000% migration attraction everywhere, allowing you to get thousands of migration attraction. It's super OP. Also, the extra migration quota is going to be good as well, because, having 2,000 migration attraction versus like 500, it's basically the same thing as far as I understand, because you're going to be hitting the cap more than necessarily attracting more pops. But also plus 50% mass migration attraction. Migration is largely a fight for the top slot to get all the mass migrations, and this plus 50% just means you win that game if the AI doesn't use this. And so I think that this is probably the best principle just overall. Alright, so this is one I have to experiment with more, but foreign investment doesn't seem very good at all. It's usually the case that you need to get investment in order to pull someone into your block without subjugating them, or this is one of the easier ways, and so the fact that you get investment rights with someone who has a lower rank doesn't seem that useful. The minus cost for nationalization I don't think is that great either. You don't want your buildings to be owned by yourself, but this is minus cost for nationalizing stuff when you have an agreement to allow other people to invest in you, and maybe there's a reason for doing this, but this also lets your subjects nationalize cheaper after you've built something in them. But the increased leverage from economic dependence, this has to be where it's at, and I just don't think it's worth the slot. It doesn't seem that good. And finally, we have colonial offices, which seems pretty strong. Colonial offices is going to give minus 50% infamy generation against unrecognized powers, and that's the main thing that I feel that it gives. It gives colonial growth generation minus bureaucracy. These other things don't seem very important, but this minus infamy generation from unrecognized powers can be stacked with a few other modifiers, like the tech change to multilateral alliances to give minus cost, as well as the cautious ruler trait. All these together, they stack multiplicatively. You can get minus 75-ish cost on unrecognized power stuff, so you can take Chinese provinces for like 5 infamy, which is of course very cheap for a Chinese province. Next up, we have the new ownership system. Now, admittedly, I do not feel like I have the biggest handle on this at this point in time, but ownership no longer happens at the side of the building. Instead, you will see when we read the weekly balance, it goes dividends to other buildings, and they will be going to these buildings of the financial districts, which are going to be owned by capitalists and shopkeepers at the outset. But with publicly traded, you could switch on to being predominantly capitalist instead of in their ownership class, and it is at the site of these buildings that the weekly balance will occur. They will generally be dominant in buying the types of buildings they had before. So the capitalist-owned financial districts will tend to buy the capitalist-owned buildings before, but you can see there are going to be exceptions, and it does seem like there's maybe some ways to manipulate this sort of thing, so you can have more capitalists buying agrarian stuff. It does happen with commercialized agriculture, but also if you only have agrarian buildings, if you only have manor houses, they'll have to buy the capitalist stuff if that's all you have for sale. Here we could see these guys are predominantly agrarian, except for they do have 3 capitalist buildings because that's primarily what we're building. There's a third type of ownership, and that is going to be government ownership. And you can see here, if we look at the tab down here, we can see the logging camps here are owned 4 government-owned. There are going to be 3 owned by financial districts and 2 owned by local workforce. Now, it seems to be the case that government ownership in general is really bad and not something you want to have. It's bad for 2 reasons. One, it is bad because the government dividends, or some of these dividends, what will end up happening is if you have any sort of government dividends, a very hefty malus will apply to them in terms of dividend efficiency. So here, their dividend efficiency is 24%. That means the 75% of the money that had been going to dividends is instead erased. Beyond that, the old investment pool malus is gone. Investment pool, as your economy gets bigger and bigger, does not decrease anymore. So this means there's not a reason to swap off of laissez-faire because of losing money or having a negative money modifier. Instead, that negative money modifier or a negative money modifier similar to it is all government ownership. So you do not want to have government dividends. But some economic system types will be able to deal with this a little bit better than others. We'll talk about that when we talk about economic systems. But the second reason that you don't want to have government ownership is that government ownership is going to decrease throughput. It is going to decrease throughput by 50% if it is purely government owned, and is going to increase it by a proportion, or it's going to decrease the economies of scale throughput bonus, rather, not just throughput on its own. It's going to decrease the economies of scale throughput bonus by 50% if it's purely government owned, or by a proportion that is equivalent to that if it is mixed ownership. You see, this is owned by a manor house, two different financial districts, and the rest is government owned. And so the economies of scale throughput bonus has been decreased by 30%. So it would be 10%. Because there's level, or it would be 9 because it's a level 10 building, but instead it is reduced to 7%. So this means when you're getting up to economies of scale bonuses of 51 or a building level of 51, actually I think that economies of scale bonus is now also changed where you don't need the extra level. It applies at the first level, so you only need to build buildings to level 51. My muscle memory on that is going to get absolutely crushed. That was another change. But it's going to make it that so that roughly 20% of the value, if it's all government owned, all other things equal, just based on the throughput consideration alone, is going to get destroyed. But also, we have this government dividends business. So we'll need to talk about the economic systems. For the economic systems, if you've been watching any of my stuff the past few days, I've actually changed my mind on this quite a bit, and part of the reason I've changed my mind on it is because there appears to be a bug. The bug is that there appears to be things that are going into government dividends when they should not be, specifically when there is mixed ownership. And the easiest way to view this is going to be the laissez-faire has 100% government dividends reinvestment, and so there should be zero government dividends, because all of it should go to the investment pool instead, and increase or decrease with a fraction of dividends from nationally owned buildings levels that is paid out to the investment pool instead of being converted into government dividends. But yet we're still getting government dividends. Where the bug occurs is specifically at sites where you have split ownership. So if we go back to Pennsylvania and we look at some of this, we will be able to hover over the weekly balance. The dividends to other buildings, these are going to the private ownership entirely. That's their share. They get 5K. We see here reinvestment. It should be all of the rest of the money should be reinvestment, but instead we're seeing government dividends, which are subjected to that hefty 75% malus. The degree to which this occurs seems to be proportionate to the amount of ownership that is going to be public versus private. And so this means that if you have a building that is 100% government owned, it all goes to the investment pool as it should be. But other than that, it is sending more to the dividends, and this is very noticeable with laissez-faire. So that said, it seems to be the case that if the bug were not present, laissez-faire would just be the strongest economic system. We've experimented quite a bit. Traditionalism is made worse than it was before, but it is going to give 25% government dividends reinvestment, and at the same time, it's going to give a lot less capitalism or a lot less investment pool contribution. It's going to be very hard on traditionalism for private owners to buy buildings. And remember, we prefer private ownership by a very, very strong margin, so it seems even more imperative to get off of, but it's just kind of always been imperative to get off of. Interventionism is interesting and is maybe good early on. The important thing for interventionism is you could see that they are going to get extra dividends efficiency. So instead of having a 75% loss, they'll have a 50% loss. And in that sense, it can feel like you're getting a little bit more control and you're getting some more money out of your government-owned buildings, but we're both deleting value from the throughput as well as deleting value from applying these to reinvest or applying these to government dividends at all because we are having this government's dividends reinvestment. It's only 50%, so this means we will have government dividends, but it's not working properly anyways, so even if this is 100%, we still have government dividends. Agrarianism seems slightly better because they have this government dividends efficiency that's even higher than interventionism, which is an interesting one. It might even be better than interventionism. I don't really know. We have industry banned is kind of in a similar boat as agrarianism. I think the three of these are B tier, uber F tier for traditionalism, and then we have command economy, which is probably D tier, something like this, because it is encouraging you to go everything that is going to be government owned. It gives you way more government dividends efficiency than anything else. However, I think it's just bad to have government ownership at this point. Having taken a closer look at it and tried command economy, it seemed to be the case that we were having even smaller income, even with more of that government dividend efficiency, which is the entire point of having direct ownership, is that you get more money, that you get to choose how to spend it, and if it's not even giving you more money because it's deleting money in other spots, then it's just very clearly not worth it. So we're putting this just ahead of traditionalism. And then we have kind of the former, like, best in the late game. We have cooperative ownership, which has, first of all, 100% government's dividends reinvestment, but also the pops will own all of the buildings, and so you will have a forced private ownership, which is something that is kind of nice. It is the good reason this is good is because it increases SOL. I think this suffers from the freedom of movement principle being so good, because if you're already winning the migration game, one of the really big advantages of having high SOL is winning the migration game. If you're already winning it because you want freedom of movement, then cooperative ownership is maybe a little bit redundant. And then we have kind of, I think, even more clearly best, laissez-faire, which now doesn't fall off. There's no government investment pool contribution, there's no investment pool contribution malice anymore. So laissez-faire doesn't fall off in the same way, and it has all the same advantages it had before, but also it has government dividends reinvestment of 100%, which seems like a positive modifier because you do not want to be deleting money, and so the fact that it only has 25% dividend efficiency is irrelevant because it should be giving no dividends, but it currently is bugged. With the bug, I think interventionism is better if you're going to have a lot of government ownership. If you have a ton of government ownership, you would rather have interventionism than laissez-faire. I think you'd rather have cooperative ownership than both, but you're still getting the really huge advantages of the +1 company, the loan interest rate, and the capitalist free money modifier, investment pool contribution efficiency. So that's kind of where I think things are in the economic system. Been really trying to get this one right for this video, which is why we spent kind of the earlier day streaming and taking a look at a command economy, but it just doesn't seem to pull it. Was kind of excited about the fact that you would be getting extra government dividends efficiency and that you get the most on them, up to 80%, I think, if you're playing Afghanistan specifically, because they get a 5% bonus to this. Command economy, if you wanted to play command economy, though, it is so much better than it was in 1.6. It's just clearly still bad. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful on that front. I do think you can make some sort of argument on the basis of cooperative ownership for radicalism reasons, which is kind of the next thing. There are three things that we observe that should really crank up radicalism quite a lot. The first is going to be grain prices will be perma-high. You should not try and collapse grain prices. You should not take a high grain price as an indication that you should span a bunch of farms, because grain production in subsistence farms has been reduced by half, and grain production in farms has been reduced by roughly 40% across the board. There's way less grain. Equilibrium prices are much higher. A little bit of caveat to this is the labor saving PMs on the grain have also been buffed, and so grain in the late game is a pretty good industry to invest in, because these industries, or these labor saving PMs, cost way less. Notably, tractors and compression ignition tractors not available on rice, so rice is kind of nerfed. Also, rice's input is double. Input and outputs are double in every spot, except for on fertilizer specifically. For whatever reason, it's 30 instead of 20, which is what it should be. So rice is kind of in a rough spot. I imagine this is supposed to be 20, and that's just not. That's just an input error, and it's not supposed to be the case. But grain will be perma expensive now, and this is going to be the most important thing your lower rung pops consume. So this is going to increase radicalism. Second is going to be that running high taxes constantly might not be meta anymore, because the penalties for legitimacy as well as radicals have been doubled. So it's going to be really hard to stay above this contested government 51 while you are on high taxes. And I think this might be the new way to kind of think about things, is we run taxes as high as we can and still stay above 51 if it's important for us to be passing laws. But also, this is going to increase radicals, right? If we start ticking down as the result of being in the higher tax bracket. Finally, the really big reason you don't want radicals is less to do with the people being upset. We don't really care about that, and more to do with turmoil. Turmoil is often managed through police. Police across the board have been nerfed by 5%. So local police, instead of applying 20% per level, now applies 15% per level. Dedicated police, instead of 15%, gives 10%. Militarized police, the same thing. Relativistically speaking, this is effectively a buff for local police, but with police giving a lot less reduced penalties from turmoil, this means you're going to be eating construction malices if you start acquiring a lot of turmoil in places. Now, I don't think we have too much turmoil going on. We are on Council Republic, we have a relatively high SOL, but where you do have high turmoil, if this is impeding your ability to construct buildings, it's not really worth it to tax high just for the purposes of being able to afford more construction if that construction has to churn through a malice. Expansion has changed quite a bit. Yo-yo sways, generally speaking, have been nerfed. They've been nerfed in a ton of different ways, so I won't just give a long explanation, but one of the ways that they've been nerfed is now subjects lead revolutions, and so when Great Britain has a subject that has a revolution, you won't be able to sway in to peel something off of Great Britain. You'll just be able to sway in to try and peel something off the subject. Also, reducing autonomy no longer costs infamy. So this means you can reduce autonomy for cheaper, and it means, generally speaking, you have a lot more infamy to work with throughout a run. However, you do have to play this mini game regarding diplomacy of reducing their liberty desire by enough in order to reduce their autonomy to begin with, and so you're going to have to pay attention to these modifiers and this sorts of things. Generally speaking, relations seems to be a very strong driver of here, but we've noticed things like having not a lot of convoys will absolutely wreck your ability to try and integrate any of your subjects. Further on the expansion strategy is you can now build stuff in foreign countries, and so if you can build stuff in your subjects, which you always can, I think it's less important that you actually annex them down, which even further frees up infamy. You can also siphon off a lot of pops from your subjects using migration to make it cheaper to annex them later, so this informs the strategy as well, but more talking about foreign investment rights, I think that generally speaking, as long as you have a lot of pops, you will want to just invest in your own country when viewing things entirely from an economic perspective, but you will be able to generate leverage by investing in foreign people's countries to be able to pull them into your block, and so this will be a reason to engage in foreign investment otherwise. But whenever you're creating a building, value is created in one of two ways. It's equal, the amount of value you create is equal to the output goods minus the sum cost of the input goods, but it's created in one of two ways. One through the weekly balance, and two through the wages. When you are building in foreign countries, you only acquire the weekly balance for your ownership pops back home, which will probably raise SOL, which will help to drive migration, which will help to give you more pops, which will allow you to, build in your own country. But also, the wages, these are going to be given to the local place. There is one, and I haven't done the math for this, there is a scenario where I think this might be worth it, which is that we have Austria here. We could take a look at Austria, and we could scroll down, just click on domestics, just scroll all the way down, and we see all the companies Austria has. When we are building in that country, I'm fairly confident, I haven't uber confirmed this, but we use their own local construction rate. And so their construction rate will be heavily increased by their construction bonus that they're getting from companies. And so if they have a company for, let's say, clothing, and we do not have a company for clothing, it actually might make more economic sense to build clothing in other people's nations who have companies. I'm not 100% sure on this strategy. I've been executing it. It seems to make a lot more sense to build, if you're going to build in their country anyways because you want to, it definitely makes more sense to build stuff that has companies, and even more sense to build stuff that has companies that you don't have. For our companies here, we do not have a clothing company, and so building clothing in Austria makes sense, even though we are not getting the value from the wages, because between the throughput and the extra construction efficiency, effectively making it cheaper to build in the foreign country, it might mathematically make more sense. I'm not sure, but this is something to consider as part of, the strategy regarding foreign investment. Haven't explored a lot. There's a lot in there. On the flip side of things, I haven't experimented very aggressively at all with allowing, investment in our country. On this Krakow run specifically, I had to avoid it very strongly from Austria. Otherwise, I would not have been able to get my liberty desire high enough. So it's bad if you're a subject. But other than that, it kind of seems like free money to some extent, unless you don't have a lot of pops. If you do not have a lot of population, receiving foreign investment is probably bad. This is something that bricked our Panama run, and so I probably just have trauma, and it's it's probably just good, but it is something to consider that it is not universally good in the particular of if you're out of peasants, you almost certainly want to be acquiring the dividends from yourself. Thinking of it from, Austria's perspective here in reverse, when we receive a foreign investment, we have to use up all these workers that are here. We have to use up all these laborers to produce only 5k of value instead of 9k of value, but we get the building for free. And so this is kind of, I'm not sure exactly how you evaluate this, but I think that overall it will be worth it to accept foreign investment and instead just trying to get pops to migrate to your nation. Just a few key considerations with regards to if you're a subject or if you're out of pops, maybe don't do that. Another thing I wanted to mention that I don't understand that well is recruitment seems to be slower. I'm not sure if this is intentional. Some people have suggested it's the result of manor houses. I'm not really sure, but this does mean that if recruitment is slower for whatever reason, or your ability to raise an army is slower, two things are going to be the case. Making last-minute armies is going to be considerably worse, and secondly, winning the initial wars is going to be considerably more important because if you can't recruit up and your opponent can't recruit up, then whoever died a lot in that initial war, as well as maybe assigning to the front late in order to avoid attrition, these are going to be things that are going to be slightly more important than they were before. You no longer get recognition militarily, instead you get it diplomatically with a journal entry that is unlocked with the civilizing mission tech. So if you're playing an unrecognized power, it takes a whole lot longer. I believe the devs are going to be moving this to an earlier tech, maybe sometime next week, so this is just something that you maybe want to hold off on if you're playing an unrecognized power, especially China. We'll show that very briefly in just a sec. Multilateral alliances, also, we mentioned it earlier, but the huge minus infamy generation buff really makes it a lot better. And also, central planning is now going to give plus government dividends efficiency. Not that you want to lean into this anyways, but it's worth noting, and so will modern financial instruments give the plus 5%. I think there's one on Afghanistan that is local. China specifically is going to really, really suffer from having poor infrastructure, at least right now. I think this is getting changed next week, but it is a hellscape of a start. A little bit of a fun challenge if you actually want a little bit of a challenge, but this costs infrastructure, the manor houses, which own all the subsistence farms, so you basically start with zero infrastructure if you are playing someplace that has an enormous amount of subsistence farms at game start, and so that will be an interesting struggle and also a reason to play or to avoid playing that within the next week before it gets changed out. This is one that is kind of hard to show something concrete, but the AI seems both much more competent and much more aggressive, and so this will make every single, kind of smaller start considerably harder. If we sort by GDP in this game, USA managed to get nearly 500 million GDP, $500 million, doing very, very strong. To be fair, this was not on the patch that went live. This was on a pre-release patch for making videos on, but you can see everyone's GDP is really cranked up. This does seem a little bit lower when we do a lot of meddling, and so maybe this is a symptom of us not getting any sort of bankrolls and this type of stuff, but even then, I still think it's indicative of a much stronger AI, and the AI is very aggressive, and it is also very vindictive, and it is not psychotic and randomly aggressive. Instead, it does seem to be informed a lot by the new diplomatic system of catalysts, as well as their lobbies, and so this is an interesting thing to play around. I think it feels a lot more human. I think it feels a lot more interesting, but just to keep in mind, if you try and do something that was, a lot easier before, it might be a lot harder now because the AI is a lot more aggressive, and so something to keep in mind. This is one that is going to be interesting to explore, but wine now tends to be expensive, and the reason for this, it is now not only a luxury drink, but it is also an intoxicant. For those of you who don't know, the number of buy orders in the market is not informed by a product's price. It's not informed by the price at all. Instead, it's informed by the number of sell orders there are in the market for that. And so previously, when we had a luxury drink, we have a lot of sell orders. The quantity of sell orders will inform the buy orders, and it more or less provides you with some sort of thing that resembles buying stuff based on price. But now, with this also counting as an intoxicant, it's double dipping on how much its sell orders inform buy orders, because its sell orders are informing the buy orders, not just for the luxury drink, but also for the intoxicant. So it might be the case that it is actually worth exporting wine, because your exports will over-inform pop consumption elsewhere and raise the price higher, and it might be worth building wine, and it might be worth slotting in wine companies I don't have the answers, but this is something to keep an eye on. Very interesting. But you will generally see expensive wine prices, and then you will also see, as a result of this double informing, there will be a lot of buy orders of wine. Wine will be one of the best or one of the most lucrative consumption taxes as well. So someone had several questions about this patch in a post I made about kind of doing a metagame update. The first of which is, how can I tell what percentage of my GDP is owned by others? You can use this GDP ownership map mode, which will show what percentage, a heat map of your GDP you own. So you can see here we have kind of a little bit of ownership everywhere in Austria, which is helping us to reduce their liberty desire, for example. They asked about how to nationalize foreign factories. That is done with this nationalization button here. The open market CB is also gone. There's no really such thing as markets except as is done through the power block, so that's going to be less of a thing. And then they asked a question about treaty ports, and treaty ports appear to be not working as intended, as far as I could tell, but I wasn't taking a close look at that. Another content creator mentioned to me that the treaty ports were not overriding tariffs, and so they might not be doing exactly what you want them to be doing right now. I'm not sure. I haven't investigated this closely. And that's kind of the main points I wanted to make. If you think I missed something that's really important in terms of informing the metagame, obviously I didn't explain anything, I think, in a really complete way. I tried to do a fairly good job of covering specifically the blocks and the economic changes, because I think that those are kind of the substantive ones, because the system is like wildly different. But other than that, I tried to not spend too much time on anything. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Also, please, if you feel like I missed something, really do put it in the comments. Because I think people might read through the comments for ideas or discussions or this sort type of thing, especially because ideas are emerging right now. Everyone's kind of figuring out what's good. The patch changes a lot of things, and so that would be very helpful. But other than that, have a good one.